And now hear this scripture lesson from the Gospel of Matthew. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, during the time of King Herod, Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem in Judea," they replied, "for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means the least among the rulers of Judah. For out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Then Herod called the Magi secretly and found out from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child, and as soon as you find him, report to me that I too may go and worship him." After they had heard the king, they went on their way. And the star that they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped over the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary. They bowed down and worshipped him. Then they opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. May God bless the reading of his word. Now, in all the Bible, there are only two narratives about the birth of Jesus. There's one in the Gospel of Matthew, and there's one in the Gospel of Luke. Both Gospel writers had very different audiences. Matthew's audience was the Jewish community, and Luke's was the Gentile community. Now, in the Gospel of Luke, the whole focus is around Mary. The angel comes to her. The Magnificat, she is blessed among all women. Then she goes and stays with her cousin Elizabeth, who is going to give birth to John the Baptist. In the Gospel of Matthew, which is written to the Jewish audience and a very patriarchal tradition, Mary is hardly even mentioned in the story. The angel comes to Joseph. And also, it's the Gospel of Matthew, we have the story of the Magi. Now, who are the Magi? We know they're from the East. Magi in Greek means astrologers. They come from the East. Scholars believe Persia, modern-day Syria, Iran, and Iraq. They were not Jewish. They weren't Christian because it hadn't been created yet. But they were probably followers of Zoroastrianism. Zoroaster was the primary prophet and the religion of Persia. Also, I just encourage you to go online and look up Zoroastrianism and just read it. You might be surprised to find that it has a tremendous influence on modern Judaism and Christianity even to this day. Now, it goes from magi to, we call them wise men. It's not far off. Cicero said that these were learned and wise men from the East. And then eventually it becomes three kings. Not literally kings. Not too many kings are able to leave their kingdoms and travel all across the land to go find a child. Plus, kings are typically very self-absorbed about themselves and their power. But those are the Magi. And then we notice that they see a star rise up. And the star they interpret as one who has been born that's going to change the world. And they wanted to meet this child. So they start their journey from Persia and they come to where Herod is. And the wise men do something that most men never do. They stopped and asked for directions. They went to the king of Israel, Herod, the one who was ordained by the Roman government, and they asked him, "King Herod, where can we find he who was born King of the Jews?" And the passage says that Herod was disturbed. Now, it's an accurate translation, but disturbed means something different from me than it is in the context in the Greek. I can see something on the news that disturbs me, but I don't particularly lose sleep over it. The word disturbed in the Greek means this. Find it? Well, it means to stir deep emotions. It means to create extreme dread and fear. It strikes to the gut of an individual. So in other words, Herod and all his court, when they heard this news, they were losing sleep over this. Now, who is Herod? Herod is one of those persons in history who was able to make both the Jews and those of Christian posterity hate him. He was known to be a bloodthirsty, ruthless killer and ruler. Caesar Augustus once said of Herod, "It's safer to be Herod's pig than to be his son." Herod adopted the Jewish religion even though history shows that he wasn't particularly devout. But because Jews do not eat pork, Herod did not kill pigs, but he killed one of his wives, he killed his sons, he killed anybody who he thought was a threat to his rule. Herod was also known to be one who would fall into deep depression and paranoia. And Josephus, the great historian of that age, tells a story that when Herod knew his time on this earth was getting shorter, he was afraid that when he died, no one would mourn him. So he asked two of his children to have 100 of the most distinguished and beloved men come to Jericho and stay there. And then upon his death, they were to kill all 100 so that there would be wailing and weeping and grieving. Well, thankfully, his children didn't follow through on that. But it gives you an idea about Herod. Extremely jealous, the jealous king. So here's the story. Herod tells him to go to Bethlehem because that's where the prophecy says this one is to be born. But come back and let me know so I can go worship him too. So the wise men, or the magi, or the three kings, they look up and they see the star in the sky once again in the light, and they follow it right over the house where Jesus is. Now that's a key thing in the story too. In our Christmas creche, we have everybody. We have shepherds, we have the wise men, Joseph and Mary, we have the animals. But you can see in this particular story that Jesus and his family had gone from a lowly stable into a house somewhere. So that's where they come to visit. And when they find him, they're overjoyed and they open their gifts and their treasures. It's a lovely story. It's a very powerful story. But what I want us to do now for the rest of our time this morning is to look at the spaces between the sentences, to look at the spaces between the letters and the words, and to see if there is a meaning there that can teach us something. First of all, the Magi followed the light. Light is often used as a symbol of enlightenment, of knowledge. People of the light are typically very gracious people and people who don't have evil intentions upon the masses. They looked up and they saw the light. And then they were willing to follow that light wherever it led them. If we truly want to become enlightened people, if we truly want to be human beings who strive to connect spiritually our soul with the light of the divine, the only way that we can do that is follow the light. That means read. Read things that empower you. Read things that educate you. Read things that challenge you. But don't get caught up in toxicity. Right? If you want to experience the light and discover the light and be transformed by the light of the divine, the light of God, the light of Christ, then you have to be willing to follow it. as we take this commitment to become enlightened, to become whole, to become complete, to be deeply, intimately connected with the divine, my soul with the Spirit of God, with the Spirit of Christ, along the way you're going to encounter darkness, and that would be Herod. I don't know why it is, but people who are enlightened, people who exude kindness, people who exude love, people who are charismatic, people who start empowering the masses to think differently than what those who rule from their ego are doing are a threat. And those who are threatened by enlightenment will do whatever they can to snuff the light out. They did it to Jesus. They did it to Gandhi. They did it to Abraham Lincoln. Tried to do it to Mandela by putting him in prison for 26 years. A young woman from Pakistan who wants women, girls, to have the privilege to be educated. The Taliban shot her in the head to hush her up. But you see, the darkness never overcomes the light. It never does. And even if people kill the messenger, their energy, their teachings, their aura, their essence continues to live, and it continues to affect people way beyond the time that they were here on this earth. We know that. We know that. So don't be surprised when you start your journey or you're on your new journey to be enlightened, to receive an epiphany, to receive a revelation. You're committed, and on your course you encounter darkness. Even in our Lord's Prayer it says, God, lead us not into temptation. Now, another thing that it shows is that don't always expect the revelation to come from something grand and big and huge. The Magi discovered their light that they had sought after, and they had traveled so far for, in a small little town called Bethlehem. House of bread, Bethlehem. Tiny little town. Ybor City, Florida. Tiny little place. They did not find this beautiful human beings that the star had said to them, you need to go and meet this child. They didn't find him in Alexandria. They didn't find him in Jerusalem. They didn't find him in Rome. They found him in Bethlehem. A tiny little place. Tiny little place. For me, that says is that when we are on this journey and we are following the divine within us and our soul is connected to the light that's taking us on a journey, if it takes us to some place that seems small and insignificant, don't discount it. Because sometimes in those things which are so little and seem so insignificant to the world around us is where we have our most profound experiences. Then, after they go to this little place, they were willing to go to this tiny little town. The light shone over the house. Now, we know how stars work. There's not a light that goes like a laser beam from a star that's hundreds of light years away, but it's symbolic. When the light hovered over a particular house, they went to there, they met Jesus, and they were overjoyed. This is the lovely thing about the spiritual journey. After we've been through the wilderness, after we've encountered the toxicity of the world, and we continue and we persist, when we have that moment where we experience the divine personally, we're transformed, we're enlightened, we're overjoyed. We're overjoyed. You know, those, we call them mountaintop experiences, right? And whenever you have this kind of experience, you can't hold it to yourself. You have to present your gifts. You were created with certain gifts and abilities and passions. When we are enlightened and we are empowered, we must share those gifts with others. And what I believe is the more enlightened we are, the more powerful our gifts are when we present them to the world and their ability to inspire or to transform others. So that's a part of the spiritual journey, is sharing the gifts and being overjoyed because you get it. One of my favorite professors in seminary was Dr. Max Rogers. I remember asking him one day, Dr. Rogers, why is it that you teach? And he says, each semester, I'll look at that classroom of, 10 to 15 students. And he says, and I teach them everything I know, answer their questions with everything that I know. And then occasionally, there'll be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 who get it. And I see the light turn on. And it's the most satisfying thing in all of my life, to know that I helped someone to turn the lights on. You see? I know that personally, as I've been one who's counseled, I've been one who's taught. But when I was a counselor for the Center for Drug-Free Living, the clients would progress on a level like this. And then in a small group or in an individual session, something would click, and you could see it in their eyes. It was like someone had spotlights behind their eyeballs, and you could see it. And then the progression would go like that. It's turning the lights on. It's becoming enlightened. It's something that you now have knowledge, you now have an experience that changes you and transforms you. The last thing is, in a dream, they were told, don't go back to Herod. Take another route. I'm one who studied Carl Jung. I love dream work. I have vivid dreams. I always have. I wanted to figure out what the dreams were telling me, so I've done a lot of work behind that. Some of you have come to me, and we've done dream work together, and you know that these crazy images and people and things in your dreams, they seem nonsensical. My wife calls them a bad B movie that she can't get out of. But that's your soul communicating to your conscious mind who you really are and what's really going on deep within you that you might not even be aware of. So the wise men, the magi, those who were enlightened, when their soul, their intuition, their dream said, don't go back the way you came, they listened to it. And as we, each and every one of us, are on our own journey to becoming whole, to becoming complete, to be people who connect deeply and spiritually with the divine spirit and the image of God, whether it be Christ or faith or however it comes to you. After we've had that revelation, after we've had that experience where somehow we're transformed, it means oftentimes we can't go back to where we came from. You know what I'm saying? We're different now. You go back home and they don't understand you. I remember that when I went back home, came back to Florida from after my seminary experience, I learned I had incredible experiences, and I came back home and people said, we don't like who you are now. Why don't you be like the Barton who, I'm not him anymore. Sometimes when we travel, we have to take a different route. Toxic people, toxic places, toxic behaviors, toxic things in our life that we tolerated are now intolerable. And we find that we're now living differently. We're taking a different route as we're pursuing our lives and becoming more and more connected to God. As we are on that route, we find now we're taking different paths to get there. Jesus said the road to perdition is wide, and many people are on it. But those who want to enter the realm of God must go through the what? The narrow gate. We take the road less traveled because we've had a taste of the divine. We've had a taste of the light. We've experienced the presence of God, the presence of Christ in a profound way that's changed us. We have to now move forward and oftentimes take a different route. Now, why does it work this way? You would think that when we announce to the heavens and all of God's heavenly host, I now want to be a child of the light. I now want to be completely whole, and I want to know all things. I want to be transformed, and I want to be completely enlightened. God and the heavens and all the hosts would say, yay, this is wonderful news. Here's a very straight path that's well lit, and you can just follow that all the way. It doesn't happen that way. You have to go through the wilderness before you get to the promised land. Even Jesus had to go have a wilderness experience before he started his ministry. And even in his ministry, before he was crucified, there were 2 or 3 other occasions where he was questioning his purpose. See? That's the way it works. That's the gig we're in. Why? If you have to work really hard for it, and if you're totally committed to travel anywhere and go to any place, however small, medium, or big it is, if you're willing to sacrifice it all to have this knowledge and this enlightenment and this knowing that your spirit is connected to the divine, you've got to want it really, really badly. Because God knows, and we know, there's lots of distractions out there, right? So this is what I see the story of Epiphany, the story of the Magi, can teach us, as it becomes a symbolic story of what it's like to take the spiritual journey. It's got to be something you want more than anything else in life. And it takes a lot of risk, it has a great deal of cost, but the reward is incredible. Because as we are growing and as we're traveling down the spiritual path, we know more clearly who we are. We experience more fully the divine within us and all around us. And then our presence upon this planet becomes more powerful. Thus ends the lesson. Let's do communion. All right.